Okay, so let's get started. Santani, are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, awesome. Okay,
Let's go.
so um, welcome everyone, or hi everyone. Welcome to the Bay Area Science Festival, sorry, and to part one of our event series called Hearing the World. We're super excited to have you guys here today with us, and we have a fun session planned. So just to introduce myself, I'm Audrey, a postdoctoral fellow at Smith-Kettlewell, and with us today we have Santani Kang, a scientist from Smith-Kettlewell. Okay, so before getting started, we just wanted to go over some ground rules to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay, so first, at any point, if you have a question, just type them in the chat. We'll either answer them in the chat or at specific points in the session, we'll read them out loud and discuss them. And second, we ask that you turn off your mic. We have some cool sounds and videos we want everybody to be able to hear today. And so to make sure that everyone can hear properly without any distractions, we ask that everyone turn off their mics and make sure that they're on mute. I think we were saying that, yeah. Okay, so moving on, just a bit of information about Santani and I. So there's me, Audrey, on the left. I mentioned earlier that I'm a postdoctoral fellow, but like, what does that even mean? Well, I'm a scientist too, but I'm still getting some training by working with senior scientists. I'm a developmental scientist. I'm interested in how we change over the lifetime. So for example, I've previously studied vision, attention, and memory in babies, children, and teenagers to see how these abilities change over time and when they mature. And at Smith-Kettlewell, I'm being trained to use different techniques to actually study brain development, these neuro techniques. And actually, by working with Santani, I'm also venturing in the world of auditory development research, which is sort of like how our ability to hear and understand sound changes as we grow up. Okay, so Santani, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and your research?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Santani. I am also a scientist at Smith-Kettlewell. Until pretty recently, I was also a postdoctoral fellow there. That's how I started. So what that what that means for me is that I've spent a while studying how we hear sounds and how we perceive the world around us. This is a very general way to put it. But the focus for me has been what happens when you can't see. So my training was actually in a vision lab. And the irony of that is that I tend to study what happens when you take vision away. And there's this interesting relationship there. So I'm interested in basically how blind people perceive the world, but I'm also interested in what that tells us about how brains and people in general work. So let's see here. So this is a very exciting picture of where we work. It's on Fillmore Street here in San Francisco. So just at the Smith-Kettlewell Eye Research Institute does, from the name you can guess, we do mostly vision science. We study how people see, what happens when in clinical cases. So, if you have visual disorders, if you have any of various conditions, glaucoma, strabismus, amblyopia, these are things that you would go see an ophthalmologist for in the clinic. And we here also just do basic research to figure out how these things work, right? We also understand that vision is not just something that happens in your eye, it's something that happens in the brain. In fact, there are lots of, with just an eyeball, there is no vision, right? It's really your brain that's making anything meaningful. So we are also interested in the neuroscience of how these things happen. So you are listening to this description and wondering, what are a couple of people doing at the Smith-Kettlewell Eye Research Institute talking about hearing and sound? Did we take a wrong turn somewhere? But of course, this is interesting because, like I was saying earlier, especially if your vision is, especially if your vision is removed or you never had it in the first place, if you're born blind, sound, for example, becomes a much more important part of the way that that you think about and that you sense the world around you. So the way that these things, so hearing becomes especially important when there's vision loss of any kind. And of course, what we also try to do here is use this knowledge to build better methods and tools for rehabilitation. So helping blind people interact with technology, find their way to places, and all this sort of applied research. So we kind of like cover it all from the basic facts to the useful things that you can do with them. All right, so let's talk about sound. This is going to be a very basic overview, but this is something that we often don't think about. Sound is everywhere around us, right? It's everywhere in the world that we inhabit day to day. But what is it actually? What ties together these? I'm not going to play the sounds for everything, but you can kind of see these images, and then you understand, what it would sound like to be there, and what kind of information we can get from sound. So if you hear that, I'm not sure if everyone heard that. That was a quiet one. But if you hear a cat purring, then that gives you some information, right? The cat is happy rather than upset. If you hear a bus, if you hear a horn, this will warn you to get out of the way, right? Street scenes are very important. This is just a picture of one of Nancy Kamwisher. She's one of the most famous neuroscientists in the world. So sound is a way that we communicate information to each other with language. If you are, looking on the horizon, or if you're just hearing, you can kind of hear what this might sound like, distant thunder. It can warn you that the environment is about to change. And of course, speaking of warnings and communicating information, right? So somebody needs attention and we don't always see it. We very often hear it. So what does all this have in common? So how do we get this? I'm going to show you a couple of little cartoon diagrams. So this is what sound looks like. We don't see it like this because air is not made of little black dots, but sound is waves moving through particles. This is a real, excuse me, a real basic overview, but a key thing to keep in mind is notice that the waves are moving, but we've highlighted a couple of these particles in red here. The particles are just kind of jiggling back and forth. So there's these waves moving forward, but the particles themselves don't really go anywhere. And the sound for us is not really the particles themselves. The particles just carry it. If you guys have, some of you may have heard this in school before. This is often called a medium, but we'll just sort of call these little dots particles. Most of the time, the particles are air, right? Because we walk around in air, we breathe in air, we talk through air, but you can hear underwater, so the particles can be water. If you put your ear to the ground, you can hear rumblings, you can hear, trains approaching on tracks. So the particles can be solid, liquid, or anything. So what actually travels forward, that would be what we call sound. And that's the energy, the waves. All right, so this is just a different way of looking at the same thing. We've just labeled it a little bit for you. But we want to just tell you that the wave travels forward through kind of a soup of particles. Now, I said particles can be air or water or solids. Particles can also be people, right? If you've ever been to a ball game or any kind of like huge event. So we've all done the wave before at some event, whether it's at, at a school game, or if you manage to make it to a big ball game. Do we remember going to these things? Hopefully next year we can do that again. But what you notice is, of course, is that the wave travels and the people, they jiggle around like this, but they don't go anywhere. And this is just the difference that we want to kind of like communicate to you here. So don't worry about this graph. It's going to be pretty simple. We don't we don't see sound like this, so we want to describe it somehow, right? We want to make a little graph. So notice that particles can be squished together or sort of stretched apart. And so this is, so we can kind of say, well, sometimes it's, it's under high pressure and sometimes it's under very low pressure. So this is a very boring sound. It basically sounds like this. Ooh, right? It's just a single tone. So we would kind of just, chart the journey of a single, of a particle like this. And this is a very basic description of a sound. Most sounds are way more complicated. Like if you were describing the sound of my voice, it has some high parts, it has some low parts, and we can try to plot, we can try to write, sort of graph those in the same way. It gets a little messy, right? Some of these are higher, some of these are lower. We can kind of plot them like this, but we usually we kind of color code them. So I'm going to play you a very famous real sound, and you'll see what these things look like, in a more natural world. Okay, so here we go.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So you can see this is a much more, squished together and complicated waveform. That's what we're calling this, but it's the same basic idea as this, just more complex. And the red, sort of the color coding here just indicates how intense each part is. These are just two ways of looking at sounds. And so if you see us plot these squiggly lines, you just know that this is a way that we're showing you what sounds kind of look like, how we think about it. Okay. By the way, does everyone recognize what that is, right? We don't have to quiz you, but this is maybe one of the most famous phone calls of all of human history. This is Neil Armstrong stepping on the moon in 1969. Okay, so this is what sound is. It's not a fire hose of particles being sort of streamed at you. It's energy moving through the particles. All right. Now, Adi, do you want to throw up the poll there?
Okay, so we have a quick question for you guys about sound. So launch this poll here. Okay, so based on what Santani kind of just talked about a few minutes ago, what do you guys think sound is made of? Is it A, particles moving through space, or B, waves moving through particles? Okay, I see several answers coming up. Okay, we're gonna give you guys like another 20 seconds.
Yeah, just take a moment and think about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, also, these are not trick questions. We just kind of we have no way of seeing, right? So we just kind of want to make sure that we're all more or less on the same page, right?
Can you resend the question? It disappeared.
The question disappeared?
Yeah.
Okay, did you answer the question already?
No.
No. Okay. I'm not sure what happened. Is it possible that it's still open, but just like hidden by some of your other windows? Okay, if you're not sure, we'll make sure that you can answer the next.
Yeah, answer this. Finally found it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna quickly, guys, if anyone still hasn't answered yet, like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. Okay, and here are the results. Can you guys see the results?
Yeah, so it looks like we got 58 responses, and almost everyone said waves moving forward through particles, and that is right. That is what we wanted you to take away from this. Now, the particles, of course, they vibrate in place, so they do move around in space, but they're not moving forward in the way that the energy of the sound does. So, and this becomes important in a second here when we talk about what what our ears and our brains do with sound. All right, cool. Let's see. Let me just close this window here. Oh, look at that. It is the answer. Here's the answer key. These are just the easiest quizzes. Okay, so sound is a different thing from hearing, right? We're talking about sound as something that happens in the world, and hearing is something that that we do to receive and understand sound. So how do we pick up the sound around us? All right, well, most of us have a pretty good answer to this already, right? A good place to start is, well, how about the ears? And that makes sense. So let's zoom in a little bit. So here is a diagram of what is just inside the ear, right? There's a little tunnel, the ear canal. A lot of you will find that it grows a lot of wax, you know, and you're not supposed to stick stuff in there. You learned that early on. What you find here, this looks kind of like a snail on the inside. This is an organ called the cochlea. We don't have to get into the details too much, but the eardrum is just like a tight membrane that kind of closes up the end of this canal, and any sound that comes through the ear canal and vibrates the eardrum will basically kind of activate the cochlea, and then it will make the auditory nerve send signals to the brain. All right, so what that means is that the ear canal doesn't just get a lot of particles like we talked about, right? It carries the energy from the waves that we were talking about. So it's only the particles that are right next to the ear canal that actually vibrate the eardrum. And this is the basic way that sound in the world, which is vibrations and movement, gets translated into information that our brain can process, which is auditory nerve signals. All right. So in other words, your brain itself, the brain inside your head, is not actually getting these sound vibrations. They're being translated by the ear, and that's what the ear does. So what happens after that? Just like I mentioned earlier, that vision is not just the eyeball. Hearing is not just the ears. So here's a little view inside the head. You can kind of see that this is a front view of the brain. It's kind of a funny looking cross section. So there is this wrinkly part on the outside, and we'll get another view in a second. This is what we call the cortex. That's just the outside shell of the brain where a lot of important functions happen. And this part highlighted in red is where most of the sound is processed. So what, we're looking at pictures. You can kind of see, let's take another view here. If we take the brain out and look at it from the side, so that this is the front, this is about where the auditory cortex is. You can look at pictures, but I want you to remember that you also have an auditory cortex, right? If you just sort of point your fingers at your ears and poke your fingers about 1 inch behind your, like past your skull, don't do that. But if you were able to do that, you'd be touching your auditory cortex. So it kind of makes sense that the part of the brain that's responsible for hearing is as close as possible to the ear. So the story is a little more complex than that, but this is how we start out learning about hearing in the brain. So here is I'm about to show you a movie from a real experiment. So something that a team I'm working with is working on right now. So it's in progress right now. So we were able to measure, a bunch of people's brain activity while they listen to normal sounds, and you can kind of watch it spread. It's very slow motion, right? MS means milliseconds. So we have to count up to 1,000 to actually reach 1 second of real time. But you can see this is kind of a transparent view. It'll kind of rotate. And it takes a little time for the signal to reach here from the ears, but you'll see the signal kind of start here on the sides, right? That's where the auditory cortex is. And then pretty quickly, it spreads to many other parts of the brain, right? So it starts here. That's the most important portion for hearing, but it kind of goes all over the place. Now, all this, you're watching this happen in slow motion, but all this is happening pretty fast, compared to the way we normally experience things, right? So this is 400 milliseconds. Now, we don't have to go through the whole thing, but once we get to about, once we get to about here, blank, about 500, that is half of 1 second. So you play a sound, and in half a second later, you have already, you have already processed most of it, right? You could kind of see that there was this spreading wave of activation, and the brain really processes this kind of stuff very fast. Now we don't need to go, again, you can always ask questions about this, but we don't need to go into too many more details about how the brain works. But just let us know that you're with us, and maybe let us know what part of the brain is most directly responsible for hearing. We'll see if we can make this poll work.
Let me go to that. Okay, so can everyone see the poll?
Yeah, so I feel like you guys are catching on that this is a super hard class with really hard questions. But of course, the point is just to understand that there are different parts of the brain. They don't all do the same thing. They have functions that we're all still figuring out. And you don't need to think too much about this, obviously. Oh, good. We're getting a spread of answers. Excellent. And all right. So do we all have the idea? I feel like, let's see. I feel like if we can just end the poll and sort of see what the answers look like.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah.
And
the winner is B, which is correct, of course, as we were just talking about for the past couple of slides. Now, just in case you're curious, it's not like these are random parts of the brain that do nothing interesting. Let's see here, let me just close this. So B is right, of course, but here's a very simple map of the brain. I added a couple extra parts. So, in general, vision is sort of in the back of your head, sort of the back third, but this is the most important parts for vision. There's hearing, so touch is right about here, movement is right about here. So there are these functions that are kind of separated. And planning and control, these are more abstract things. These are the kinds of things that we want to preserve, right? These are important things that help us move around in life. So this is why people tell you to wear a helmet when you're biking and so on. This, of course, is a very simple map. I mean, it's kind of like you look at an incredibly complicated thing and you kind of say, there's some dirt, clouds, and water. It's, that's true, but of course there's much more to go. So we're past this level in science right now, but there's still a lot more to go before we fully understand how the brain, where in the brain different functions happen. Okay, so listening to our environment. So this is how we use hearing and the brain to understand the space around us.
So sorry, Santani, before we continue, there are a few questions
oh, yeah, sure.
that I think would be a good time for us to kind of go over. So one question that someone had asked quite a little while ago was, can the eardrum break?
Can the eardrum break? Yes, the eardrum can break.
Mm-hmm.
The eardrum is pretty good at healing, but it can break, if you just poke it, right? If you accidentally get a Q-tip too far in there and you really push on it, so don't do that. That's why they tell you not to do that. If you stick pencils, whatever in there, it can break if you have too much pressure. You know how we said sound is just the energy wave, it's not the air itself. Well, if you send too much air in there, if you send too much pressure in there, either from a very loud sound like an explosion, or I hope this is never a problem for anyone, but like a gunshot or something, you can damage your hearing because you're damaging the eardrum. So you can break it mechanically, or you can break it with too much energy, too much sound. And if you clap some, if you get clapped on the ear, that sends a little shock wave through the air just in your ear canal,
Okay.
and that can damage your hearing too.
Okay. So someone was someone else was interested in like from the ear, like what's happening sort of before sound information gets to the cortex.
Oh,
Yeah.
between the eardrum and the cortex, where we just sort of said, this is what happens.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of things happen. There is, well, there are a bunch of real tiny bones that are attached to the eardrum, and they are kind of like the levers that the vibrating eardrum uses to amplify those vibrations, right? The eardrum's tiny, so we have to figure out how to make it bigger. So there's like a little bones that kind of function like a bullhorn, and they stimulate something. Well, okay, for whoever asked, they stimulate something called the basilar membrane, and the basilar membrane is the in the picture that we saw about that looked like a snail, the coily part. It is a thing that is the thing that is sort of curled up, and there are nerves attached to every part of it, and the way it works is actually, to me, kind of magic. It's sort of amazing because the way it is set up, it splits up whatever sound you hear into higher and lower pitches, so higher and lower frequencies, kind of like a piano, right? There's keys look the same, but they sound very different, and they're ordered in this way. So you got sort of this little rolled up piano, and every nerve transmits a different frequency to the brain. So what the brain gets, what the cortex gets, is a signal that is sort of like the outside sound broken down into different frequencies.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So one person asked, well, how does the eardrum vibrate? You kind of mentioned that, but I think you didn't talk about how does the movement of the air particles or the
eardrum vibrate?
Make the eardrum vibrate?
Well,
I don't know if
let's think of, if you think about not an eardrum, but just a regular drum or a tambourine, anything where you have sort of a sheet stretched tight, and you sort of knock on it or pound it, or if you can kind of do that to any surface, a wall or something. Anytime you hit something, when the knocking sound you hear, if I am knocking on the table or anything, the sound you hear is the sound of that material kind of shaking just a little bit and shaking the air, and that vibration is something that you hear, and you hear a knocking sound. If you're a tiny air molecule and you make a very tiny knock against the eardrum, you don't hear much. But air is not just one molecule; it is billions of them, even just inside your ear canal. So tons of tiny little knocks all together, when they're moving together, like in these waves that we saw in the animation, that together causes the eardrum to vibrate, and the eardrum is very sensitive. It can detect that a very low level of sound.
Okay. So we do have
the short answer is many tiny knocks.
Okay, so we do have other questions, but what we'll do is I think we should move on so that we can make sure we get through everything. And at later points, we'll try and answer those other questions as well. So Santani, you can.
Yep, sounds good. Okay. So let's try this. I'm going to show you a video, and it's just a 10-second video. We're just going to take and it's just a walk from one place to another. Okay, so just take a look and a listen here for 10 seconds. Okay, now that was a very exciting video, I'm sure. That was a friend of ours and a colleague, Caitlin. She's a scientist working in Canada right now. And this was walking from a hallway into an atrium on the campus at MIT in Boston. So let's take a look. So we started here and then we ended here, right? And one thing that was obvious to everyone is that we started off in sort of this smaller space and we ended in sort of a larger space, right? And you could see that happening visually. But the interesting thing that we're looking at, and that I have been researching for a couple of years, is what we know, how we can tell this from sound. So for example, this time, we've cheated. We've already kind of showed you what happens and told you what happens, but just we're gonna hear it one more time. So just pay attention to when you can hear that we've entered, that we've sort of crossed one space into another. It's a bit gradual, but you can tell when it's happening. All right. So what you kind of hear, and this is something that I really like about sound. What you kind of hear is that, right, the echo changes, the what we call the reverberation, sort of the background of the room, and you can tell intuitively if you're in a huge space or a small space, or like a library with carpeting and baffling everywhere, or a gym where everything you do is echoes for a long time. And what I like about that is that it means that even silent spaces, right? The walls, the rooms, they don't make sound themselves. They're not talking like I am now. They're not actually doing anything. You have to make a sound in there, like a footstep. But each of these spaces, a silent space, has its own sound footprint. And we're interested in among other things, how we understand, the space around us, how we are able to read this kind of sound footprint, because it's important for us. And if you're blind, especially so, because you don't have the visual information, to understand what sound tells us about the space that we're in, right? You want to know where you are. So, we cheated for you, but let's do this for something where we're not walking you through it, for a couple of examples that you haven't seen before, probably. So I'm going to play you a sound, and Audrey will throw up a poll, and you just tell us where you think it happens. This is going to be about as hard as the other questions, so brace yourselves.
Hello? 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 Anybody there?
So in case it wasn't clear, I know the answers only say A and B, but A would be the cave and B would be the closet in the poll.
Yes, even now we are not tricking you with the questions. All right, I feel like everyone is pretty on board with this. Yeah. No love for the closet there. Well,
okay.
In San Francisco, of course, this would be a studio apartment for $3,000 a month, but for our purposes, it's just a closet right now. So, all right. Well, everyone, thank you. Everyone is awake and paying attention, and you got it right, of course. So you have a certain intuition. You kind of know what it's like to be in a cave, even if you haven't been in a big space like that, versus being in a smaller space like that closet. And this seems very obvious to us, right? Often we don't even think about this. It feels too obvious to understand, but it's actually kind of a neat trick, because first it's a silent place, right? It's not making its own noise, or if it is, we're ignoring that right now, but just the space itself. And it's also something new. So you have an intuition about it, even though it's new to you. So that means you have some kind of rule book in your head. So let's try this other example. This one is, I think, a little more interesting. It's not just caves and rooms and gyms. So we're going to play you some music, and you just tell us. So Audrey, if you want to throw up the poll, you just tell us how many instruments are in this band. Okay. And I'll play it for a little while.
So how many instruments are in this band? I know you kind of heard a voice singing. That doesn't count right now. So how many instruments do you guys think you guys heard? Oh, I didn't launch the poll. Sorry about that. Okay, it's launched now.
I was wondering about that. Okay. So yeah, go ahead and answer. All right, so now that I think these answers are a bit more interesting, a little bit less unanimous agreement. And
Okay, the poll.
And 3 is the winner. 4 is close behind. Yeah, notice that it wasn't quite as obvious, right, as some of our, frankly, all of our other questions. And some folks reported just hearing 2. So let's see what the answer is here.
There's also been some guesses on what the instruments are in the chat, and here's the reveal.
Oh yeah, and here's the reveal. So this is a so most people got it right, and of course, it was everyone was right plus or minus 1. And some of you, if you answered 4, you might be thinking, well, I heard a voice, that was a 4th thing. You would be right, but we were ignoring the voice for now. But notice what's happening. The eardrum is just like people ask, what is the eardrum? How does it work? Basically, you just jiggle it. It gets one sound. It just gets one pattern, of vibrations. It doesn't know anything about what is in that sound. It doesn't know that there are 3 instruments, right? So this is something that this is basically kind of a magic trick that your brain does. It takes a single sound and it pulls it apart into what it thinks is making that sound, the different sources. And this is something called an auditory scene. This is to us one of the very interesting things about how hearing works, is that your brain is basically doing an impossible math problem, right? It is getting one signal and it is making up. It's taking its best guess about what that signal is. So this is something that Audrey and I are interested in figuring out right now. When I say best guess, when I say making it up, I don't just mean complete randomness, right? I mean that the brain builds up a set of rules. It builds up a set of rules by which it takes its best guess that there were 3 instruments or 4 instruments, or maybe 3, maybe 4. It's not perfect at this job. Before we move forward, Audrey, are there any questions or anything that we want to take real quick?
Let me just look through them now. Someone had earlier asked a question about subcortical processing, but maybe we can keep that later in the end. We also had someone who had a question about are there differences in brain activation between participants who are sighted and blind to sound, which again, I think.
Oh, these are such good questions. I would like to punt on the subcortical processing because I know we have some coworkers here in this chat trying to heckle me, but that question about is there different brain activation in blind and sighted listeners is one of my favorite questions in the world. We won't spend a ton of time on it, but I'll get to it in a moment, actually.
Okay. Yeah. There's also someone raised their hand. I guess if they wanted to, Revent, if you wanted to ask your question, you can.
You want to ask a quick question? Take a quick question.
Can the ear sense the vibrations from your jaw moving?
Oh, great question. The question was, do the ears sense the vibration from the jaw moving? And the answer is yes. Have you ever tried to be on the phone or listening to anything while eating chips or peanuts, anything crunchy? It is way louder, right? It's way louder inside your head than if you see someone close to you crunching those chips. So it's not just the chips or the peanuts. I do this all the time, by the way. I have been stress eating lots of peanuts lately in quarantine. I don't know why, but it's very loud inside your head. And you're right, it's not like the crunching is happening right outside the eardrum. The ears are connected to the rest of your skull and the bone. There's kind of no avoiding that, right? And when there are vibrations that pass through other particles and other medium, in other words, not just the air, but also your own bone, that's something that can be, that you can hear. You hear that vibration as sound, even though it's not coming through air. So there are headphones you can buy. If you don't want to stick headphones in your ear, there are headphones you can buy that just, they kind of like mount right about here. And they're called bone conduction headphones. So you can actually use this not just for crunching peanuts, right, but also for listening to music and stuff without covering up the ear. So joggers use this so that they aren't blocking out traffic sounds while listening to music when they're out in the world. Great question. Thank you.
So I know we talked about this a bit earlier, but I think some people want to hear a bit more about how the eardrum can get damaged, like how does it break? Yeah, so I think maybe we can just go over that one more time.
How the ear gets damaged and how it breaks? Well, let's see. I think I mentioned directly, right? If you just break it, like you can break anything, like if you poke it with anything, that's why you don't want to be sticking things in your ear too far. And the other way, and the more common way that the ears and hearing get damaged is just by having too much noise. And either we think of very loud noises like jet engines. If you are flying and you look out the window at the ground crew before you take off, everyone out there is wearing big ear protection, and it's because you can't be next to a jet engine. That the ear is not built to process sounds that loud, right? It gets overwhelmed. But really the way that hearing gets damaged most of the time is very slowly, just by listening to the loud world that we live in most of the time, right? We've got earbuds in a lot. We have TV on all the time. There's traffic everywhere. This is a much louder environment than the ear evolved in. And so over time, it's kind of like just having the volume up too loud. You kind of wear out the speaker. That also happens with the ear over time. So over many years. Let's see. We're actually doing okay, but shall we move forward for now?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
All right, so we were just talking about this magic trick that the brain does to pick apart one sound. Okay, I said one sound, it's kind of two sounds because we have two eardrums, but what I mean is that each eardrum gets just a single pattern of vibrations, and it has to pull apart what all the pieces are. And it has, there's no information about that in the sound. It has to use its own rule book to figure that out. And we just showed you this fun example of a band, like it was like, well, this is the only way all of us will understand it. Well, here is an image from one of the major reviews in the field from someone named Jennifer Bisley. So this is a very technical diagram, right? So this band creates a complex mixture of sounds, and somehow the brain has to pull it back apart to understand that there are three sources there, right? So this is just a very, it's a very on-point example. And as an example of what I'm talking about by rule books, you might think this is obvious because we also showed you in most cases, you can kind of see that there are three, that there are three objects and you're hearing a complicated sound. So you're pretty sure, your brain is pretty sure that this object is making the sound, and it can sort of map what you are seeing to what you're hearing. But that's also a trick, right? If you're watching TV and you are watching just any old scene, a couple of people talking, you are being tricked, kind of. I mean, you're being tricked into hearing what's actually there, so it's not it's not a real bamboozle, but you're being tricked into hearing two or three different people talking when what you're hearing from your speakers is just one sound, right? So you're hearing and seeing these things at the same time, and that can be one rule. If I see one thing and I hear one sound and they're kind of moving together, that must be one sound source. And then if I hear a sound and I see two things, maybe that sound is happening. Maybe that sound is a combination of two sound sources. So vision can be one of the guiding rule books. Another rule might just be like what exactly the sound is made of, right? So here's an example. Okay, well, I don't have the sound to play for you, but just think about a waterfall. right? Think about what a waterfall might be. And now I'm going to give you a sound. So just blowing into the mic, that was not a waterfall. That's just me blowing into the mic. But the sounds of air static and the waterfall, they seem very similar in a lot of cases, right? So how does the brain know that one is a waterfall and one is not? How do we know what exactly tells us what's what? Okay, so you get the idea. So now we're going to this one is going to be a little bit harder. I see someone's been annotating our slides. So we're going to throw up another poll, and we want you to take your best guess, right? Here's another example. Mothers have never heard their babies cry before they're born, kind of by definition, but they're immediately able to pick out the sound of their own babies very quickly from the very first. They didn't have to practice any of this, right? On the other hand, language is something that we have to learn, right? You hear other people speaking it and so on. So these are two examples of some kind of rules happening. Yeah, so take a moment and tell us what you think. How do we know the rules for understanding the sounds around us? And some of you might have heard, okay. Oh, this is good. This is very interesting. I like this. And some of you might be familiar with this kind of question. We often think about it as nature versus nurture, right? Is it built in, or is it something that comes from our experience or learning or the environment? Good, I like this. Okay, good responses. So we're getting about a 2-to-1 ratio of experience versus built in. And the tricky thing, of course, is that I kind of gave you an example of, of each one possibly being true, right? So this one is not as obvious as the other one. All right. Good job. Thank you all for your feedback. Let us see what the answer is. And the answer is, we don't know. This is not an answered question in science. This is an unsolved problem, right? And of course, the real answer almost certainly is basically what you together as a group have said, that it is partly one and partly the other. So anytime, this is my little advice, anytime someone says nature versus nurture in anything, I would say, almost never is it purely one or the other. It's usually some combination. So this is what our research is right now. So for example, if something is entirely nature, if it's built in, well, then you should be able to, a baby should be able to tell what it is. And if it is learned, then you should be able to see that babies and younger children are worse at something than older children and adults. And this is kind of Audrey's specialty. She has worked with babies and kids in her research. But also, in my experience, if I'm working with people who've been blind since birth, then some things, if they're able to do certain things, then it means that you don't need vision. Vision is not part of the nurture, right? So we're interested in these different ways that hearing is influenced. So the way to, this is just a cartoon to illustrate this, right? So if we can do things at any age, then it's kind of we're born with it. And if if things have to develop into adulthood, then we think that there's some experience happening. And like we said, we think in most cases it's some combination of both, but the interesting thing is figuring out what parts of what, like what parts we learn and what parts we're born knowing. So for example, what's different for people who can't see, if you go blind later in life, or if your vision slowly deteriorates, or if like me, you are, nearsighted, does that matter if you just wear glasses or anything like that? For example, if you don't have vision as one of the influences growing up, does it change the way you use your other senses? So I'm going to remind you here, remember this very simple map we had? It's more or less right. So now I'm going to come back to it and show you this is not a quiz now. You can just, I'll just walk you, talk us through it. So I'm going to show you two images from real experiments. So these are brain images. One I flipped, so that's facing the same way. But you can kind of see this is a real cross section with an MRI machine from experiments, and you can kind of see that the experiments measured activity, right? We'll just call it activity. We measured the brain working in this part right here. So from our simple map, we would say, okay, well, it looks like they're looking at something, right? We're pretty sure that this would likely be vision happening. And for the older or nerdier among us, this is calcarine cortex as the primary visual cortex. So it's kind of like the most visual part of the cortex. Now, what these experiments actually are this is a blind person reading Braille. So that's the raised dots that you read by touch. And this is a blind person doing echolocation. They're hearing echoes, not just sounds generally, but echoes that come back from the environment, like bats or dolphins sometimes do. So the interesting thing about hearing is that with experience or with your circumstances, the maps can change, right? And this is one of my favorite parts of neuroscience. I think this is why I got into the field, because we all learn these maps, and we want to understand that the maps can change, that vision might be doing something else if vision is not available or useful to you, right? Now, we are not getting into this directly right now, but if you remember when I told you that you can tell the difference between a waterfall and me just blowing into a microphone, something that is superficially kind of similar. They both have this sort of rich, broad, staticky noise. So we want to know whether you can tell that difference as, if you're sighted, if you're blind, if you're young, if you're old. And this is something where we're actually doing an online experiment right now that you might, if you like, you're welcome to participate. This is not part of the fair. This is our own actual science experiment. So there's some stuff to go through. Audrey, do you want to walk us through how this works?
Sure. Okay. Sorry, I was just answering some questions.
But our idea is, and we just have a couple minutes left, but our idea is that if you're interested in doing this, then on Sunday, at the last day of the fair, we'll kind of see how many people participated, and we'll kind of maybe go over, the information we collected, and we can kind of follow up, and you can see how scientists try to work with data and information, and what conclusions we might be able to draw from it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so do we want to go to the next slide?
Oh yeah, right, sorry.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we have a video prepared here, sort of like a demo video. It's sort of going through the steps from the Bay Area Science Fair website. So you can see this is our event. If you scroll down.
So we have a link right here. That's our own project.
Mm-hmm. And you see, once you click the link, it's actually going to open a new window with like a project info page of our study. So it has information about what the goals of the study are and how you can participate. If you are interested in participating, you're just going to have to click here, like exactly where it says click here. And that's going to bring you to this process that we call consenting. You want to pause that for a quick second, because like, what does the consenting process mean, right? So the consenting process is actually an important part of research. As scientists, we need to follow like ethical rules, and part of these rules is to make sure that our study participants, so maybe you, knows what will happen when they participate, and understand that their participation is completely voluntary. So it's like completely up to them, completely up to you if you want to participate. So you can keep playing that. Okay. So the demo video is going pretty quick right now, but what we're doing here is we're asking some information about like your vision, your hearing, your birth date, and all this information is going to be kept private and secure. Like no one will ever see this information except for Santani and me. And when we're looking at this information, we're only collecting it so that we can get a group average of our data. So for example, if we get some children to participate, we want to know, well, what was the average age of the kids who participate? That's really the only way we're going to be looking at that data. So once the form is submitted, what's going to happen is you're going to receive 2 emails from us. One with a copy of the form that you filled out, so you can go back and look at it if you want. And the second email will actually have the link to the game and your participant ID, and that's really important. So let's just, I think I'm almost done submitting the form in the demo here, or in the video. All right, okay, finally, I've submitted it. And you can see this is the participant ID that I was highlighting here. Okay, and then when you click on the link, which is gonna happen soon. Yeah. You'll see this is the game. While the game is loading, you'll see it's loading at the bottom. You can put in the information. So remember the participant ID was 109. You can put the age, 31 or 20, I think, for the person who filled out the form, and your gender. And for your gender, if you choose to not say, like, if you don't want to say that, that's totally fine. You can just type in decline to say. That's what that means. Okay, so once it's loaded, like maybe we can move it forward a little bit, Santani.
So to download, so just bear with me.
And this is just an example of how like the instructions are gonna look like. And you're just gonna go through the instructions so that we make sure you know what you need to do before you start the game. And if maybe you forward it all the way to later so they can see an example of
blah, blah, blah. Where were we?
Like forward it a bit more.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, so this is actually an example of how the game looks like. You can't really hear sounds for this demo right now, but I promise you when you do the real thing, you'll hear some sounds. And basically you're gonna hear like one sound when one door opens and another sound when another door opens. And what your job is to just kind of pick which one or which sound you think was recorded in a real room. And I promise it'll make more sense like when you play the game. And that's basically it, yeah.
Yeah, so real and fake, basically, you know, if you hear a real sound like a real echo in a real gym versus something that might sound pretty realistic or super fake like me going, right? You know that's fake, but you know that I'm trying to kind of make it sound like that. You can tell the difference, and we want to see how well you can tell the difference. So just bear with us for, it takes like 15, maybe 20 minutes max. And if you're interested, we would love to have you participate. And if you have more questions, obviously just write us. I feel like we're almost out of time, right? But yeah, that would be it. If you're interested, we'd love to have you participate at your leisure. Let us know if you have questions, but for now, that is it. And thank you for bearing with us, and thank you for listening.
Okay.
And do we have time for questions, or would we?
I think we do have like maybe a few more questions. So one person asked, would your hearing break forever if you listen to music too loud?
Oh, great question. And so that's a complicated answer because sometimes if you do it for way too long, then the answer is, yeah, possibly, you know, you can permanently damage it. But in most cases, if you're just listening to music, sometimes if you go to a concert or listen to something very loud, then you can kind of tell everything sounds a little quieter afterward. That is a temporary effect, right? So don't worry if you're listening to music too loud, you know, for a while or one time or something, but that by itself is going to have a permanent effect. I have gone to concerts where at the end, all I could hear was almost nothing except a little bit of a ringing. You don't want that. That's not a good idea. So if you go to a loud live show, when we can do that again, bring earplugs. But the eardrum is surrounded by these little muscles, and the muscles they can tighten if you're in a loud if you're in a loud environment, and they tighten to protect the eardrum. They don't want it to basically vibrate too much, right? They want to keep it. It's kind of like turning down the volume on your speaker.
Okay. Sorry, 1 second. I'm trying to reply.
That's a good question.
Questions. Okay. So let me go all the way back. Okay, so someone asked, do you need to be in a quiet room when you do the experiment? Is there any special equipment you need? So that's a good question. We kind of go, like, once you participate, there will be instructions about that. We would like for you to participate or to be playing the game in a room that is quiet so that you don't get distracted. Because remember, we're trying to get you to listen to some sounds and to make some decisions about the sound. So in order for you to be able to hear it properly, we want you to be in a quiet room. We also want you to either wear earphones or headphones. That's really important as well.
Yeah, the important thing is to have headphones and earbuds. And basically, you know, we know we're all at home. We would much rather have you come into the lab to do this if you're interested. But of course, you know, we are all where we are right now. So lots of people are doing massive online experiments. In general, we would just want you to be in a, you know, imagine that, I imagine most of you are in school. Just imagine you're kind of like doing homework, no music, you know, we know it's not going to be a fully silent environment.
Mm-hmm. So someone asked, do you want people with some degree of hearing loss to participate in the study too, or only people who hear well?
Good question. So our main interest is so this is one of those questions that we don't actually know that much about, even at the baseline level. And by baseline, I mean even if you have no hearing loss or no vision loss. So all that stuff we were talking about, blind people, you know, how these differences between sighted and blind people, that is actually fairly unexplored, right? So we're trying to get the baseline first. That said, if you indicate that in your response, you know, like the study is available to you. It's not like we would stop you from participating, and we'd be interested in knowing who has hearing loss.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just see if there's anything.
So that's a way of saying it's not our main, you know, thing right now, but it is all, you're welcome to get in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Dr. Helen Simon, who's actually an audiologist at Smith-Kettlewell, she sort of asked a question, or sort of wanted a point of clarification that different parts of your ear can get damaged, right? So not just the eardrum could get damaged. And say, for example, if you listen to a lot of loud sounds, that can actually damage the cochlea, which is another part of your ear that could lead to hearing loss. So did you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yes, that's a great point. Okay, so hi, Helen. So Helen has known everything that I have said for longer than I have probably been alive, actually. And so yeah, so she's the real you know, guru here. But that's a great point. We were talking about the eardrum like it's the only part of the ear that can get damaged and the only important part. You can listen to noise for a long time, your eardrum is fine, but the cochlea, the little snaily part that contains the basilar membrane we talked about, so the connections between the vibrating parts and the parts that convert that into nerve impulses, those can wear down over time. And I have recently seen, like animal, you know, rodents, after a lifetime of being sort of exposed to loud noise, those connections, they just look very worn down. It happens at this cellular level. Yeah. And we actually don't currently know how to regenerate that. That by itself is, that damage doesn't fix itself over time, as far as I know. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that may be it, guys. So unless anyone had any more questions, thank you guys so much for being here with us today.
Yes, feel free to email us, possibly see you on Sunday when we follow up. Thank you and have a great rest of the festival.